In 1990, we published the first results of our network security monitor. And while it detected interesting things, there was weird traffic we just couldn't determine whether it was an attack or not. The traffic logs simply didn't provide enough evidence to reach a conclusion on the weird traffic. In the paper, we suggested that a future version of the NSM save and use the actual network data. So in the next iteration of the NSM, we added packet data. So by 1991, we had the client IP address telling us the device and organization that initiated the connection, the server IP address telling us the destination device and organization, the server port telling us the application associated with the connection, and the packet data letting us look for interesting signals inside the data as well as perform actually useful forensics. Using this system, we were able to detect and verify several hundred attacks in just a few months. And that early success helped usher in the golden age of network security monitoring. The Air Force, Defense Information Systems Agency, and Department of Energy took copies of the NSM and deployed it as ASIM, JIDS, and NID. Commercial companies such as Haystack Labs, Wheel Group, ISS, and Accent brought network intrusion detection products to the market. And open source software such as Bro, Snort, and Wireshark were created. The 1990s were a great decade for network-based intrusion detection. And nearly a quarter century later, Bro, Snort, and Wireshark are still under active development and use. And they are probably still the most well-known tools to detect and analyze malicious activity in the network. Indeed, even today, network analysis still seems to dominate. If you look at SANS, their intrusion detection course is dominated by network traffic analysis. And the Department of Homeland Security has standardized on network traffic analysis for the detection of attacks on federal government sites. But in the world of technology, nothing stands still, and many changes have created significant challenges for us. Probably the most well-known challenge is the near ubiquity of encryption today. Not being able to crack open packets and look at the data takes away a lot of features we could use for modeling or evidence we can use in investigations. To get a feel for how much traffic is encrypted, run TCP dump on your computer and look for SYN packets. Browse the internet and look at the server port in the connections. Every time you see port 443, you are seeing a new encrypted connection. Like me, you will probably see most of your connections are encrypted. So encryption has taken away a rich source of material for modeling and investigating. Next is the client. The use of DHCP and NAT routers make it incredibly difficult to identify actual client devices from the network traffic. DHCP essentially shuffles the IP addresses associated with devices. Trying to find a client device associated with suspicious traffic can be like playing 3-card Monte, but with dozens or hundreds of cards. And a NAT router basically hides many devices behind just a single IP address. To see this for yourself, go to whatismyip.com with several of your devices, or alternatively, get several of your colleagues to go to the site with their laptops when you're on the same network, especially a Wi-Fi network. Chances are, all of your devices or all of your colleagues' laptops will appear as a single IP address to the rest of the world. Here are IP addresses for my Mac, iPhone, and iPad. They're all the same. DHCP and NAT make it challenging to build profiles for devices or quickly identify an internal device associated with suspicious network traffic. And the server port? In the past, the server port told us which applications were running on both sides of the connection. Port 21 was FTP, 23 Telnet, 79 Finger. But these days, with REST, almost all new network services run over the same port, port 443, and they're all encrypted. HTTPS really is the new TCP. As an example, here is some background network chatter from my Mac. The column towards the left identifies the applications. No web browsers were running, but almost all of these applications were making outbound connections over port 443. So with virtually all new network software using port 443, the server port tells us very little about what software is actually initiating a connection or why we're seeing it. And the server IP address? Remote servers is where the internet really gets weird. Cloud services like AWS, content delivery networks, dynamic DNS, virtual hosting, address block reselling and subleasing, DNS load balancing, and DNS global traffic management can make it a nightmare to figure out where traffic from your network is actually going. I'm going to provide a couple of examples, but remember, these are just the tip of the iceberg. First, I'm going to go to my personal website and then click Refresh. Each row here represents one or more connections by one process to the same destination. I'm going to bring up the details on two of those connections to www.toddheberlein.com. Both of these have the same client device, same server port, and same web host, which incidentally resolves to ext-sq.squarespace.com. So why are these treated as separate destinations? It is the remote IP addresses. The connection on the left went to 198.49.23.145, while the connection on the right went to 198.185.159.144. These are two completely different IP addresses. So the next question is, why are there two different IP addresses for the same toddheberlein.com web server? For that, we have to look at the DNS reply. On the bottom, we see the original query for www.toddheberlein.com. The next line says www.toddheberlein.com is being redirected to ext-sq.squarespace.com. And the next several lines say, here are 4 IP addresses for ext-sq.squarespace.com. Choose one. This is a form of load balancing using DNS. It just so happens that the first web connection chose one IP address, and when I click to refresh the page, the web browser just happened to choose a different address. So if an analytic system or a human investigator saw these two connections to two completely different IP addresses, would the tool or human know that they are for the same web server? So you might be thinking, wow, this Todd Heberlein site must be really popular to require load balancing across 4 different IP addresses. But if I go to another website I frequent, the Accidental Tech Podcast, and pull up its connection, it goes to one of the same IP addresses. So here we have 2 different web servers sharing the same IP address. If I pull up the DNS reply for atp.fm, I see that while it doesn't appear to redirect to Squarespace domain, it does return the same 4 IP addresses. So in one case, multiple IP addresses for the same web server, and in another case, multiple web servers for the same IP address. The content is controlled by one organization, for example, me or ATP, and the software stack is controlled by another organization, Squarespace. The internet is really weird. And these Squarespace sites are actually fairly simple. Let's look at a slightly more complex example, FICO. Loading up just the FICO homepage prompts my browser to make connections to about 24 different servers. Of these 24 servers or so, only 2 are identified with the fico.com domain. The first, www.fico.com, is redirected by a DNS to the content delivery network Encapsula. So from the network perspective, I only see a connection to an IP address controlled by Encapsula. The second connection, content.fico.com, is a little more interesting. It also uses DNS to redirect my browser to a different organization, in this case, Salesforce's Pardot.com. But Salesforce does not own the IP address. That is owned by Amazon. So the initial query was for a FICO domain. It was redirected to a system controlled by Salesforce that lives on a computer owned by Amazon. So from the network perspective, I only see a connection to an IP address owned by Amazon and completely miss the Salesforce and FICO relationships. Also note, when I go to the FICO homepage, not a single connection goes to an IP address actually controlled by FICO. And for a more complex example, here's what happens when I go to the NBC News homepage. Connections to about 90 different servers, and as far as I can tell, not a single one of these IP addresses are actually owned by NBC. This is a glimpse of how complex trying to understand even the concept of a server is today. There are layers of indirection. It is hard to know where the client software was trying to go, what organization controls the content at that destination, what organization controls the software stack at the destination, and all this is probably different from the organization that controls the destination IP address. So when our automated tools analyze the traffic, or when a human tries to investigate some activity, our direct knowledge about that activity has become increasingly blurry. All we may know is that some application on some device in my network sent some traffic to some system on the internet. So don't be surprised if your analyst, who is trying to understand this data, looks like he has a headache. And this blurriness is usually about north-south traffic between our organization and the rest of the internet. This is generally the best access to data our tools and analysts have. The movement from broadcast networks to switch networks and the increasing segmentation of our networks mean that east-west traffic within our organization, often isn't available to us. And the switch from desktop computers to laptops and the growth of Wi-Fi and ubiquitous high-speed networks mean that our employees are taking their computers off-site all the time. So this is another chunk of network traffic that often isn't available to our tools to analyze or our analysts to investigate. So we went from the golden age of network security monitoring, where we had access to all the traffic, we could peer into the packet for additional detection signals and for conducting investigations, and the client address and the server port were things we could understand, to today, where we are increasingly losing access to the data, and the data that we have is getting harder and harder to interpret. And all this is happening as the attackers are getting more sophisticated and better resourced. So spare a thought for your security analysts. Their job has never been harder, and the stakes have never been higher.